time is running out. Just one more day of testing left, and that pecking order is starting to emerge. The clock is ticking. 8 hours of testing left. It is very exciting. On today's show, we are going to talk all about that Ferrari rotating wing. Ruth is going to be on that. Lawrence is going to shed a bit more light on Mercedes' engine. We're also going to talk about Aston Martin's struggles, and we're going to give the midfield a little bit of love because no one else is, but it's also very, very close between all of them. Ruth, Lawrence, hello. Lawrence, let's start with that Ferrari wing then. It is all everyone has been talking about today in the paddock.
Yeah, I think Ferrari came into this season talking about having a Spec A car, a real baseline car they wanted to work through at their shakedown into the first week of Bahrain. And then they hinted that upgrades were going to start coming. And the first one came yesterday, that little wing near the exhaust from the rear of the car. And then the one that really got everyone flapping about was this rear wing that was rotating that I'm sure, Ruth, you can talk us through.
Yeah, Ruth, come on, give us the details.
Well, you know, normally a rear wing, when we go from our straight line mode to our normal mode to straight line mode, it goes flat. It lies back like a DRS. However, this Macarena rear wing, which is now the official term coined by Fred Vasseur because it goes, woo, flips 270 degrees. So it is shedding drag very, very efficiently and effectively. It is giving you huge braking efficiency. You're getting a little bit, probably a bit more downforce and drag at the beginning of the straight, but when you get to the braking, you are going very, very, very thin. Like you're getting a skinny rear wing for free, and it works automatically. Oh, it's stunning. It looked like about 8 to 10 kph, but it was a test item. So that is a pretty difficult mechanical system. You can see it's actually the way that it's even connected. Obviously, it's got to be different to a standard rear wing that doesn't do it at Macarena. But they ran it this morning, got some data on it. They're in the garage. It didn't look like it was anything to do with that rear wing, but for this afternoon's running, they reverted back to the standard spec.
Which was a bit shocking because it's sort of like, if it works, why are you not sticking with it?
She's not an engineer, is she? Well, the thing is,
I'm not, no.
is this afternoon's running is just too precious to add an extra variant into it. So let's say that this is a rear wing that we're only going to be potentially seeing of our menu of different choices of rear wings. We go from a big draggy rear wing that we need for Monaco to a very thin rear wing that we might need for Monza, for example, with efficiencies where our trade-offs are slightly different. It might be that actually in terms of data collection for what they need for all the other million things that Formula One wants to test, is that they wanted to go for a more standard spec for the race work and the qualifying work they were doing in this critical afternoon session. Or it might be they've seen something they didn't like, or it might have been a proof of concept in terms of correlation. We don't know. It's the joy of testing. But I wouldn't say it was any alarm bells that it wasn't necessarily running this afternoon.
Lawrence, you have been talking to a lot of the different teams, a lot of the team principals. What are their opinions on this rear wing? And have some of them said, yeah, we thought of that, but we didn't want to do it?
I think it's raised a lot of eyebrows. Often when someone comes up with something so quirky, you know, when we had DAS and Mercedes brought that to testing a few years ago, and people want to talk about it, I think often the first initial reaction is, okay, we didn't think about that, let's hope it's not good. The other one is, actually, yeah, we thought about it and it doesn't give us the gain that we wanted. To be honest, they're not going to admit it right now because it's tested. They don't want to admit that kind of thing early doors. But I think the fact that Ferrari were able to bring that piece, they brought that piece yesterday, and that they've got more to come, I think really shows how strong Ferrari are looking at the minute. And they kind of went under the radar last week. No one's really talking about them. We were talking about this Mercedes, Red Bull, and whether or not they were the favourites. And I think Ferrari really stepped it up. And Fred's not saying I'm not talking about performance anymore, which I'm pretty sure between you and me, Bay, he said about 15 times last week. He started talking about performance, and I feel like we're starting to see that out on track, particularly with Lewis Hamilton's start. Did you see that at the start of the end of that?
Yeah,
incredible.
He just left everyone else for dust, didn't he? It was insane. Ruth, is this rear wing going to be good, though? That's the question sort of everyone is wondering. What do you think?
I mean, in terms of the innovation, it looked great on track today. You know, speaking to some teams, you know, a couple of them said that they had found that solution. Now, they could just be lying, but they said that they had found that solution. But what you do pay for is a little bit in terms of the acceleration, because you are carrying a larger rear wing, even if you're gaining in braking. But, you know, I love it. I think it's great. And I quite like the fact that at the beginning of these new regulation eras, we get such divergence in terms of the design of the cars and also the philosophies. It really looks like Ferrari have really tried to focus on giving that rear stable platform as much as they can, which was one of the things that both drivers, particularly Lewis, were struggling with last year.
Let's keep moving. Right, we've got Mercedes garage on our left here, so let's start talking about them. Lawrence, Toto Wolff has, received more question marks over their engine today, more comments on their engine. He says, no, it is legal. Where are we up to on this?
Well, he described it as a storm in a teacup, and what he's referring to is there's been a lot of chat, I think, about the Mercedes engine coming to pre-season. Compression ratio was the hot topic, and it was just that some teams were wondering why, when it gets much hotter, there wasn't a sensor to check the compression ratio at that level. So the FIA kind of met at the F1 Commission yesterday, and they decided that they're going to put to an e-vote a proposal whereby by the 1st of August this year, there will be a test when it's ambient temperature and when it's much warmer, up to 130 degrees centigrade. Toto Wolff kind of was asked about that today, and the belief is, he said, that it won't affect them at all. So he's trying to play down that whether or not they decide to put this proposal through for August, or if they keep it as it is, it really isn't going to make so much of a difference. So I think he was trying to play that down, but that was the big line of questioning through the press conference today.
Ruth, do you think it would affect them if these sort of rules change and they have to change their engine?
You just don't know, and that's one of the great things about Formula One. And I would say, when you get to these eras where we have chassis teams and power unit teams, and they're completely different factories. And us as engineers, I was always with the chassis sides of the teams, never working for a power unit supplier. You don't really know what those clever kids get up to. Even in your own team, it's a completely different factory. Sometimes it's in a completely different city. So I think it's one of those things where we are going to have to wait and see. Maybe it's a wild goose chase. Formula One teams love creating wild goose chases. I mean, less so in their cost cap era, but back in the day, Betty, we used to design weird little twiddly things we just put on the car to make people spend time looking at them that were completely fabricated.
And all the media just fall for it. And they're like, oh my God, something new's on this car. Okay, right, that's Mercedes done. We need to get over to Aston Martin, so let's go.
Fernando Alonso has come to a stop. Aston Martin again having a tough moment in a pre-season full of them.
So we've got to talk about Aston Martin, haven't we, Lawrence? It just feels like those problems are piling up for them. And again, they had issues with Fernando Alonso having to abort the car today. What happened?
Yeah, we've seen a fair few teams through testing have bad days. The problem for Aston Martin is they haven't had a good day in between, and that's just cost them a stack of mileage through testing so far. I know they've got one more day to go, but I think the real problem for that team at the minute, or the real challenge, is that there is just so much changing. They've got the Honda power unit in the car for the first time, a works power unit for the first time in their history. They've got a new gearbox that they've got to build from scratch, and that is no small task. They've got to do their own suspension, their rear suspension, and then they've got a team of people that they've got to gel together under new leadership in the shape of Adrian Newey, who's only been in the team, I say only, but a year's not a long time in Formula One to get things moving, and then they're doing this in front of everyone in the spotlight, trying to get everything gelled together, and at the moment, it just isn't working.
Ruth, from an engineer's sort of perspective, put all of that into context for us. How hard is it to adapt to all of those new changes?
Very hard indeed. I mean, I think the only team that has a bigger challenge, if we're kind of looking at the variables, is the one that wasn't here last year, which was Cadillac. And I mean, short of being a completely new team in Formula One, my experience from that was with Haas in 2016. There is so much carryover in terms of knowledge, IP, we would call it, everything from a gearbox in terms of gelling, as you say. And I think with this, we've seen that. But it's easier to find bigger gains when you're further off the pace. That was something I learned very early on. So they will be able to take chunks out of it. They will be able to get there. And, the project was to be the fastest car in a few years' time, 2030. And let's see where they go. Fernando did say, and we're going to hold him to it, that it will be the fastest car.
Oh, okay.
But just when?
He did not specify when.
We just don't know when, do we? That's the thing. Yeah, exactly.
Lawrence, with Adrian Newey, obviously he was this design extraordinaire, and he's now taken on this role as team principal as well, which, so much more pressure comes with that job as well. How do you think he's sort of dealing with, the negativity and how pre-season testing's been going?
Well, he talks about going into these trances, so I imagine he doesn't know what we're talking about right now and doesn't care really about all of the negativity or positivity that's going around, because he is so focused on the job in hand, which is to try and make the car go fast. And I think we've got to back Fernando Alonso when he says that, look, Adrian has, he's won with Red Bull, he's won championships with McLaren, he's won championships with Williams. So at some point, to Reith's point just earlier, he's going to do it at some point. The trouble is, when you go into an operation that was so used to being a midfield team punching above its weight, yes, they've got the best facilities in Formula 1, yes, they've got all these fancy new tools. Getting that all to work and changing that mindset takes time. They've had leadership changes as well. And Adrian, of course, is doing two jobs. He is this technical genius who is responsible to have the pencil in his office, drawing the car, but he's also got to lead a team. And it's not often that you see someone having those two big jobs. At McLaren, you've got Zach Brown and Andrea Stella doing one leadership role. Adrian's doing a leadership role and a technical job. So it's a huge task for him to do it. And it's also new for him. This isn't something he's done in the past. But I'll go back to the same thing. He's proved in the past that he's been able to do it. And I think that they've got all the resources to be able to do it. And I think they're going to need that. So it's a 10-year project from 2021. So they're going to need these extra 5 years to get to where they get to. It just means it's going to be quite bumpy early doors. And to Ruth's earlier point, I think we might see some quite quick progress from them. The trouble is, what is everyone else going to do? And will that progress actually catch them back up?
Let's talk about the midfield then. We've just walked past Haas, who are looking pretty impressive. Now, this midfield, not a lot of people are talking about them, but no one can really set them that far apart from each other at the moment. It's hard to judge, isn't it, Ruth?
Yeah, I think if you look on paper in terms of the information we have, with all the caveats that we're not going to waste time saying them all over again, fuel, mode, engines, track evolution, I just did, classic engineer. Of the midfield teams, of which we're saying everybody except our top four, it does look like Haas have had a really solid set of running. I think Ollie Behrman even made a joke in the press conference saying that when he was out behind the Ferrari, he thought it had broken, and then he went, "Ooh, that's cool," which shows that you must be actually pretty comfortable in a car. And Alpine, they said from the start that this was a project that they invested so much in this year's car. And again, I think in the midfield fight, they've kind of gone quietly under the radar, haven't they? They've been getting those laps out. I know they had the small electrical issue on Franco Colapinto's car. But generally speaking, when it comes down to those last couple of points, right now, those two teams look like they are the smoothest ones, but all to play for going into the final day of testing. Could all change again.
Yeah, I know that Sam last week said he expected an Alpine podium. I still don't agree with that fundamentally in the near future. But I do agree with Ruth that actually Alpine have done an incredible job. All the resources they put in to get the package to where it is now. And you can just get the feeling when you're talking to Pierre and you're talking to Franco, they just know they've got a better car. Like, I'm not saying we know where it is in the midfield, but that car was at the back last year and it was a very difficult project to run. They had to go to races knowing they were going to struggle. They don't have to do that now, and I think there's some real confidence in that team right now that I think they'll be top of the midfield. That's kind of my feeling from what I've heard from other teams as well.
I think that midfield battle in Melbourne could be so fascinating, don't you think? It's just so hard to know who's going to come out on top in that sort of midfield section.
Yeah,
there's a couple of unknowns, like Racing Bulls we haven't talked about, and they've had a pretty solid run through there. Their engine reliability has been not as good as Red Bull's, but they're pretty happy with the package that they've got. Arvid Lindblad, Alan Permain was saying yesterday he's done a really good job as our only rookie, of course, this year. So there are some unknowns out there. But I agree, the midfield was close all the way through the last reg set. And at the moment, all the signs are that they're going to be close. It's just that there'll be some struggles for people like maybe Williams, say, to start with.
Ruth, we're nearly there. 1 day of testing left, 8 hours to go. What will teams be focusing on tomorrow?
Well, everything they've got left on their list of items they've not checked, and that could be correlation, it could be setup work, it could be getting data for any one of your departments that all want data. But me as a strategist, I like to ignore all of those requests and just focus on myself. And so the strategist, the race team, what we want is qualifying simulations and race simulations. And with the Bahrain timings, really the only way to squeeze both of them in is either do one last thing today, so basically on those representative track conditions. So from about 5 p.m. to around 7 p.m, you've got really good track conditions that are representative of the kind of conditions you're going to go. Yeah. If you try and do a race simulation, 17, 19 laps on a tyre in the middle of the day, the tyre will become the limit. And you're not going to get a very, very good limit. But if you want to pick that, Betty, then you can't get your qualifying simulation done. So usually teams will prioritise one race sim in the evening on day 2, one race sim on the evening on day 3, and we tend to change the term and we call it glory hour. So the last hour of testing is the one where everyone tends to go for the qualifying simulation because you have the most rubber down. Usually it's the fastest. So I reckon lots of race simulations, lots of virtual racing. We've had a virtual race today between Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen. It was very exciting for me, just me. It was a 7-second lead by Oscar at one point. He got overtaken by Max, lap 51, sector 2, virtually. Obviously nothing actually happened on track. And then he had to finish his race for a red flag starting procedure, which we're not expecting to happen, but we could get more of the same tomorrow.
Lawrence, what do you want to see tomorrow?
I'm still buzzing from that. I don't know where we go from the virtual race simulation. But what do I want to see tomorrow? I want to see teams stretch their legs more. I want to see them do what Ruth wants to do, which is go chase pace, go chase qualifying pace, race pace. And I kind of want to see some teams that we maybe haven't seen enough of, like Aston Martin, just have a good day. You know, Williams just have a bit of a stronger day. Cadillac too, just have a smooth run so that they've got as much data as possible heading into the first race in Australia.
We've been doing this every evening for every testing session afterwards, and this is the busiest the pit lane has been every evening, Lawrence, hasn't it? Everybody's out here doing stuff.
Yeah, I guess they want to squeeze in as much pit stop practice as they want to, which is not very kind for our ears, but it's obviously very important for their planning. But yeah, in terms of the buzz around the place, I think there is starting to feel that we're not that far away now from the first race of the season.
It is coming. Melbourne is coming. Blink and you'll miss it. 1 day left of testing. Join us tomorrow for all of the gossip. We'll see you then.